Hello, Outsiders. We have two special events coming up in February that we want to get you ready for. The first is we are doing a Batman readathon for the whole month of February. We are releasing bingo cards with different prompts for you to fill. And people who complete the bingo cards, so you get 4 in a row, you will be entered for a chance to win a sticker of a logo from our show. If you get blackout bingo, meaning you complete the entire card, you'll be entered twice. So please, we hope you'll participate. Just so you know, it doesn't have to be Batman comics. It can be any comic. So get creative with it. All you have to do is fill out the card and send us the titles that you read for each category so we know what people are out there reading. You can join us on Twitter to participate in the readathon, and that starts February 1st and goes through the end of the month. The other event we're having is starting now with the drop of this episode and goes until the 1st of March. And that is, please leave us a review over on Apple Podcasts. And if you do and send us a screenshot of it, you will be entered for a chance to win another sticker, a Gotham Outsiders logo sticker made again by the amazing Aliza. And, we hope you do participate with us. If you do all three, that's 3 chances to win a sticker. So please jump in and participate with us on Twitter and on Apple Podcast. Welcome to the Gotham Outsiders, our Batman book club. Descending ever into chaos like Gotham itself, I'm your host, Chris, a bat obsessive, and doing shirtless pull-ups off the ledge of a skyscraper, my co-host, TJ.
Hi, everyone. I am your Chris proclaimed Batman acolyte.
We had Alfred put in a call for backup and Superman's phone went straight to voicemail again. But another hero answered our call, professor at the University of Baltimore, poet and bat-cademic, Stephen Leyva.
What's up, y'all? Thanks for having me.
We're so excited to have you.
We are.
We've had an academic come on before, but we've never had an actual bat-cademic. So could you tell us a little bit about what you teach?
Sure. Most recently, in the sort of batarangs coming through, I taught a class called The Evolution of Batman, and it was all about how his presentation in multimedia evolves over time, over his 80-year history, and it drew really heavily on Glen Weldon's The Caped Crusade as our kind of primary text, along with, a host of movies and comics and everything in between. At one point, I had the students do a dollar bin dive assignment where they had to go to a local comic book shop, buy the cheapest Batman comic that they could find, and then write a kind of critical analysis of it. So it was a good mix of like critical thinking, experiential stuff, and getting to know what kind of discourse happens in and around Batman.
That sounds incredible. We should do that as a challenge for one of our episodes at some point, TJ. That sounds fun.
Chris has been talking about the Caped Crusade book
since we met.
Since we met. And I just finally read it for this episode and I loved it. And the fact that you taught this in your class, and we were looking at bringing you on, and it just seemed meant to be when I realized that you had taught this book.
Yeah, it was wonderful. I mean, actually, it was the book itself. So, sidebar, I'm a pretty big fan of Pop Culture Happy Hour.
Yes, me too.
Glen Weldon in general. But it was really the book itself that I became so enamored with that prompted me to pitch the class. Sort of like if Glen Weldon can write this book, in this way, which I know when we talk about it, you'll find it. I mean, it's so eminently readable, but so like full of like cogent analysis that it felt so, like so much fun. It felt like something akin to reading comics, but I'm reading these these insights about history and nerd culture and all that. But yeah, that. It was really kind of falling in love with that book that prompted the pitch. And it was interesting because the person I pitched it to, she was like, one of my fondest memories was coming home and watching in syndication the Adam West Batman TV show.
Yeah.
And so I was like, I got it. There's like no doubt.
Perfect.
So yeah, it was. I owe a debt there.
Yeah, absolutely. Honestly, I don't think this podcast would exist without the Caped Crusade, and we'll get into that as we talk about it. But truly, I think it started my brain in this direction.
It's like the God
I
particle, right? Like
It
Glen
is,
Weldon, the God
yes.
particle.
I hate nonfiction, but I could not. I did the audiobook for this one. I couldn't stop listening to it. It was just so good, and I think Glen Weldon narrated that as well.
All right, let's jump into our trivia before we continue to gush about this book for the whole episode. I pulled things out of the book, so they're in there. But I went a little wide with this one because I wasn't sure exactly where your bat knowledge was outside the book, and I know exactly where TJ's is.
It's
Well,
growing.
I was worried too because my books have been locked in my office because of COVID.
Oh no!
Along with the Caped Crusade, so I know the book like pretty well from having taught it. But yeah, I mean, I hope you're not asking for page numbers, because
Okay, on page 35. No. The worst exam ever.
Don't worry too much. I've never won. I have tied
Yes.
a couple of times.
He really tied on a technicality, but he's living on that one.
Yep.
all right.
All right. The first question, mentioned only briefly in the book, but I'm curious if either one of you know, who is Batmite?
Yeah.
I'll shoot my shot. He is a weird little Batman. Like, he's Batman, but tiny. Maybe from another universe.
Yeah. This is it. Yeah, he's like an extra dimensional being, right?
Yeah.
He's similar to Mr. Mitchell-Flick, whatever how you say it, for Superman, in
Yes.
that he shows up. He's kind of a Batman super fan, and he sort of causes trouble, but also tries to help out, and et cetera, et cetera. He's kind of a version of Puck from Midsummer Night's Dream. Is kind of the best way to think about him.
Yeah, absolutely.
But he is a kind of incurable prankster of sorts with godlike powers.
Yes, there you go. You got the most important points. I always think of him. I don't know if either one of you watch Star Trek. Actually, I know TJ doesn't, but I always think
Q.
of him. He's Q. He's like adorable version of tiny little Q.
Yes, indeed.
Yes, I think the point goes to Steven on that one for having way more details.
Yeah, I hit the basics, but
I loved he's probably for another dimension.
I thought I remembered something about that. So
It's honestly, with Batman, it's a good guess most of the time. Probably alternate reality. Who knows?
Right.
All right. This was also, first of all, very glossed over in the book. And I didn't hear it until this time when I listened through it. And I wanted to bring this up because I think it's wild. So it's fully okay if neither one of you get it. I just wanted to talk about it. What character started out introduced as a love interest and at this point in continuity is family?
Yes. I think I remember.
Yes.
Is it Batwoman?
Yes.
Yes.
She's specifically the same name and everything. I was like,
well, yeah. She's sort of like, I mean, it's and I know this is you all's like wheelhouse, but it's such a move to try to. It's a gay panic introduction, of a character. And Go ahead. No,
I do. I love a character that was introduced to avoid gay panic now being a canon lesbian. I'm like, this is the
right?
This is what we want.
Right. The circle turns.
This is the gay agenda.
She met Bruce and she's like,
yeah, nope. She met Bruce and was like, not today, Satan. Like
never again.
100%. These rich white boys, I can't do it. I can't do it.
For real. Oh, imagine if Bruce Wayne was your first person you ever dated. Oh my gosh.
Why won't he call me? Why won't he call me back?
Every lesbian's gay awakening.
Goodness gracious.
All right. So that was a point to TJ on that one. You got it.
Well done.
Thank you.
The final question is less trivia and more a creative challenge. Okay. If you could give a TED Talk on any Batman thing, what would the name of your TED Talk be? You both get to answer.
It can be anything like in the Bat family.
Yes.
Hmm.
Okay, I have it.
Okay, go.
It's so predictable for me. Why every single member of the Bat family is some sort of queer.
Mm.
I do
Mhm.
love it, and it is accurate.
TED
Right.
Talk by TJ.
Steven?
I think it might be called Thought Bubbles for Ace the Bat Hound. So and maybe talk a little bit about you know how some of the most fringe characters in the Bat family are actually the most important.
I love it.
And
love
you know it by which I just mean, you know, marginalized people run the world, you know. So yeah, that's my TED
100%.
Talk. Thank you for coming to my TED Talk.
That was amazing. Sorry, TJ, as much as you like played to clearly get me with that answer, I think Steven wins because that was brilliant.
That's fair. I listened to that TED Talk.
I would too. Well, that means that Steven has won the game.
It was a team effort. Come on.
See, this is the technicality that allowed TJ to tie last time, is that our guest was nicer than I was.
I'm just over here shedding a tear silently.
A single gay tear.
A single. All right, so I think it is time to start talking about The Caped Crusade by Glen Weldon. So the first thing I have written down about this book is, wow, it really does alternate between gritty and gay, doesn't it?
that is sort of Glenn's thesis, right? But yeah, I mean, it's that's one of the things I actually appreciated about the book so much, is that it is very adamant about showing the cyclical nature by which Batman presentations of Batman occur, and that also made me think, oh wow, you know, he is so elastic, right? He is like he could be many things for many people over much time, and it sort of really diffuses the idea of a one true Batman, right? Because when people start to say things like, you know, well, Batman wouldn't do this, and I'm like, Batman at which point in time? You know, because, you know, Batman doesn't kill. Well, he dropping criminals off of buildings in his first appearance, so you know.
Like, have you seen Batman v Superman? Those people did not live.
Right. I mean, they were literally run over. Like, I mean,
they're fine. They walked it off.
I rewatched that recently, and like, he was way more brutal than I remembered.
Right?
Yeah.
Sure.
I mean, now look, I that was part of my Batman class, and I got to tell you, we got through about 15 minutes of the movie, and I shut it off in class, and I said, does anybody feel like this is a 2-hour trailer for Justice League? And they were like, yeah, can we talk about something else?
Right.
Like, yep. Yes,
I did the Snyder extended cut, so I need an award for getting through that.
Oh my gosh, you know. But yeah, I mean, it's a that you know, it's I just really hadn't considered the value of a funny, not quite absurd's not the right word, but like, you know, sort of exemplified by the Adam West TV show, or Batman Brave and the Bold. I hadn't realized the value of that until sort of Glen Weldon sort of brought that to bear in terms of his analysis in the book, and it's sort of like stuck with me as being like so important to what Batman is and can be for like the culture, for lack of a better word. I don't know, what did you all think about that?
Yeah, I loved that because it kind of clarifies for me. You know, I mentioned earlier that this podcast probably wouldn't have existed without this book. And, you know, what I mean by that is as a woman and as a queer woman who was a fan of Batman, I found myself constantly frustrated from two sides, right? There was the Bat Bro side, the people who really did not want me in the fandom, the whole gatekeeping thing. But there were the other people who didn't like Batman and were like, how could you support Batman? And they would describe this character that to me was not, quote, my Batman. And I would always get very frustrated, right? Because I was like, my Batman's not hyper masculine. He doesn't slap children. I later learned they were talking about Frank Miller. Didn't know that at the time, right? But, the Batman that I grew up with was the animated series Batman.
Yes, talk about it.
Yes, right.
I'm rewatching that right now. I just splurged and bought the Blu-ray set.
Oh
yes.
my gosh. You have chosen wisely. You have chosen wisely.
Honestly.
It's I'm amazed that I'm watching it as an adult now, and I'm like, kids watching it, and if I would be bored just because it's so dark and slow, and it feels very cinematic, and it's a compliment, but I'm just wow, it's so adult.
And yet I loved it as a kid. I was a little kid watching it.
Me too. And I mean, it's hard to even think about. It's 92 when that show comes out, so I mean, goodness, we're approaching what, 30 years?
Yeah.
An almost 30-year-old show. What I'm always surprised at is how well, narratively, how well that it holds up. It does not. I mean, I mean, they talk about this a little bit in the both in the Caped Crusade and just other scholarship about Batman. They have this art style that Bruce Timm sort of helps to develop called, they call it Dark Deco, right? So it's borrowing from Art Deco. But what it does is it has this odd, timeless quality to the aesthetics of the visuals in the show. So it's similar. There's an aspect of it that's retro futuristic, so similar to The Incredibles. You almost have mid 20th century 1950s clothes and cars, but technology that wouldn't exist at that same time. So it's a mix that Glen Weldon uses that term retro futuristic sometimes. But what I realized is it is that quality of it. You have men in fedoras and trench coats and a kind of style of clothing.
Right.
But we have AI, self-aware AI. But it is that zeitgeist of it that keeps the show so vibrant. But it is incredibly. I mean, it is intentionally incredibly dark. I mean, everything from just openly angry, people, characters who cannot control their anger. Robin.
Yeah.
And to all forms of stuff that feels very, very mature, but not, but it's still an adventure show. At the same time.
Absolutely. There's an emotional complexity to that show that is so impressive for a show at that time and for a show aimed at children, or at least ostensibly aimed at children.
I was a big fan of the Batman Beyond, just because I'm a big Spider-Man fan, and to me that always had a Spider-Man vibe going on.
It's the same team.
Yeah, just the character was way more quippy and Terry McGinnis.
Yeah.
I love Batman Beyond as well, but to me it feels like a continuation. It feels same universe to me.
Certainly with Kevin Conroy still playing, Bruce, and still knocking heads at 90,
Yeah. Talk about a story that's, supposedly aimed young, but is not afraid to go dark. Batman Beyond is a dark show.
Yeah, I'm stoked I also splurged and got that Blu-ray set, so
yes.
I'll be binge watching.
For sure. I mean, it's so interesting to me because I think there are two, not to veer too much because I'll bring it back around to Caped Crusade, but I think there are two animated shows from that same period that happened at the same time that are so influential to almost all of the animation that you see now, both superhero and otherwise. One of them is Batman the Animated Series because it's just so smart.
Yes.
In many ways. And the voice, I mean, Mark Hamill and the Joker and Kevin Conroy as Batman. These are iconic performances, right? I mean, just oh my gosh. And for many people, and I would say too, though I'm a cisgendered, straight male, I mean, even I can recognize what that show does for queer culture in
Mhm.
Harley Quinn and Poison Ivy.
Yes.
Like Gotham girls as a kind of unit, kind of their
Yeah.
own G unit. It's very queer, and so it's interesting to me how influential that show is. But the other one is Gargoyles. Like those
Yes.
two shows are both dark, both have complicated relationships and romances and characters and villains that aren't quite villains all the time, and like, oh, it's just really really
I
really nice.
I'm so glad you brought up Gargoyles. I loved that show. Can we talk about how it was Disney just wanting to make Batman?
Well, and the guy that made Gargoyles is the guy behind the Young Justice show, which
Yeah.
is super good.
He eventually
Greg
got to
Weisman.
write
Greg
Batman.
Weisman.
Yes,
Yeah.
that's
But
him.
also behind the Spectacular Spider-Man animated
Yeah.
show. If you like Spider-Man, that's a really good one too. Like, I'll watch anything by Greg Weisman.
Yeah.
But you know what, the Caped Crusade, is a big, the book is a pretty big fan of the Batman the animated series, and
Yeah.
this is one of my favorite lines from the book. He said, he basically says the animated series is Schrodinger's cat. I was like, hold up. Like, I mean, it's very nerdy, very like highbrow, almost very academic sort of thing. But that idea that it synthesizes everything, and it
Yes.
is and it is in its observation, something that is continually becoming. Oh my gosh. I mean,
Yes.
that feels so right for the kind of lasting appeal that show has. So I mean, I think that this happens in poetry all the time, where someone like writes something and you're like, how did you say the very thing I was feeling,
Yes.
but didn't have words for? I had that moment reading the section on Batman the Animated Series in Glen Weldon's book. I was like, that
Yeah.
is so damn smart and so right on. Like, how has no one ever said that before?
I feel the same way. I feel like there was pretty much every new chapter. So I've read this again. This is probably my second, maybe third time reading it. And as I was going through it, the whole time I was like, yeah, that. Like that's what I think.
This might be a counterintuitive question,
Hmm.
but do either of you have a quote definitive version of Batman, like your Batman?
I mean, I could, the thing that I can say, it's hard. It's a very difficult question for me to answer, because the book, the Caped Crusade sort of ruined that idea a bit for me in the best of ways. But I think it does a good job of acknowledging that which I think is true for many people, in that we all fall victim to the primacy effect. Like, the Batman
Yes.
that we encounter first often is going to be the Batman that has the most enduring, like, lingering in our subconscious. And so it feels like common sense, even though that's not true,
Yeah.
but it feels like, oh, of course, right? And so because of my age, I'm 38, Tim Burton's movie Batman, right, which is certainly an extension of The Dark Knight Returns, is probably the Batman that I would have for most of my life recognized as being like a quote unquote authentic.
Yeah.
But I think that's a terribly essentialist idea, and one that I think, for me, the Batman that I prefer, to be honest, is something that's a little I mean, to be honest, it's Kevin Conroy, right? It is that
Yes.
that performance in the animated series and in video games as well, like
Yeah.
Arkham Asylum and Arkham City. There is something about um, a quality to his voice acting, and quality to the writing of the show, that makes Batman seem menacing without seeming cruel.
Yes.
And it's that cruelty that I have an aversion to in in The Dark Knight Returns, and many of the grim and gritty sort of like
Yeah.
Batman things, because it makes him seem uh to enjoy violence in a
Yes.
way that I think is actually antithetical to the character.
Yeah.
And this is something that the book says too, like, what you have to understand is Batman is at his core an optimistic character,
Yeah.
not a pessimistic one. So how can that be? How does that sort of synthesize with those things? So I mean, it's a tightrope, but you gotta,
Yeah.
how can you be menacing and threatening without seeming cruel? And so Batman the animated series gets closest to me.
Yeah, I think for me, I pretty much agree with everything you're saying. Batman the animated series was my first Batman, but I was thinking back to, I don't think growing up I ever had a one Batman idea. I think this book connected to me because I was like, yeah, I get it. And I was trying to figure out why, and I realized it's because growing up I had Batman the animated series, and I was watching reruns of Super Friends and 66 Batman, and Batman Beyond was not far off. So I had all these different Batman stories happening simultaneously, and those are very different Batman. Like, they're different depictions. So when I got into comics, which was much later, I didn't get into comics until undergrad, I was totally fine jumping around continuity and like, okay, this Batman's dark, this Batman isn't, didn't bother me at all, because I had grown up with Batman being a cipher and just different depending on who was writing him. And I always found it baffling when people would be like, that this is the only Batman that counts. That said, my preferred Batman is always going to be Bat Dad, Batman as dad.
Yeah.
As, kind of, great at his job as detective, terrible at his job as father, but loves them. He tries. He's just not very good at it. That's always going to be my Batman.
Right. That's a good point of like they all can exist simultaneously, obviously. I do have to echo, like I've said before, Kevin Conroy. Whenever I read a Bruce Wayne line or a Batman line, it's Kevin Conroy's voice.
Yeah.
And of course, Christian Bale, that Dark Knight trilogy is like to me, he is like one of the definitive Batman portrayals.
And that would have hit right in that time period for you, right? Where very formative. TJ's a little younger than I am.
Yes. Yeah. I was pretty young when I saw Batman Begins in theater. And then so I guess that was the one I was most engaged with as a kid. And then but going back and watching the animated series and of course the Arkham games, like Kevin Conroy is Batman. You just can't deny that.
Yeah.
I mean, I'll say for sure, I like everything about the Christopher Nolan films, except the choice that Christian Bale does to try to disguise his voice. He sounds like like that. That is just like the like endless like eye rolling. Swear to me, like that just feels like, dude, like what? Like
the moment in the book when I learned, and I must have missed this reading it before, but when I learned that part of the reason for that was that he had a headache from this mask, I was like, what? We're giving him all this credit for acting. He really was just in pain.
Right.
As bad as Batman v Superman was, I did like how they did his voice, how it was like a voice changer type thing. I liked that.
Yeah.
It just it's so funny though, because it's a I think it's a function of trying to, they always this is a bugaboo of mine, but I think they I think some of the adaptations in film, right, are asking the wrong questions. They're trying to say, how can we make Batman relevant? How can we make it realistic? How can we couch it in this kind of like, like getting past people's suspensions of disbelief? But that is unnecessary, because Batman is like American mythology. It's like Hercules, right? You don't need, at this point, little kids who cannot read can tell you about Batman. So it is such a part of culture, right? You don't need to make it realistic. You need to make it fun. You need to make it, you need to just lean into the adventure of it. I mean, and so one of the things that I would say is, like, just imagine, I mean, even flowing with that train of thought, just imagine seeing somebody who is an Olympic level gymnast with high level technology, right, confronting you. Would he have any need to change his voice in order? I mean, like you would be so traumatized. Like you're not gonna remember that this dude sound like Bruce Wayne. Like you're gonna be like, no, like I don't, you're gonna be associating in a minute. Like I mean, it is game. So I mean but that's so it's so odd, right? To me.
Yeah, there's a billion other reasons why everyone in that movie should have realized he was Bruce Wayne than his voice, just like his tech on everything.
Right. Right.
The voice is the least of your problems, sir.
I mean, it so that's the thing that always kind of baffled me. But if you are going to change the voice, right, then you have such a model. I know we keep coming back to it, but we have such a model in the way they do it in the Batman animated series.
Yeah.
And that it's simply, Kevin Conroy simply lowers the tone of his voice just about an octave.
Yeah.
So like I did right there. And
it was very nice, by the way. That was soothing.
my undergrad training was, I thought I was going to be an actor, so all of my undergrad stuff is in theater. But yeah, so that's all you would really need, right?
Yeah.
Because it's all the mythology and the costuming and the sort of theatricality of it, that really would be enough. Like people, they act like the audience are like Sherlock Holmes. Like, wait a minute, what about this one little thing?
We have Clark Kent who just does the bare minimum, putting on a pair of glasses, and then Boris changing his voice.
Oh, there are so many funny things in comics about that. Everything from like he vibrates his face.
Yeah.
At super speed so people can't see. Like
I learned this week that Superman in the Silver Age used to have the power of hypnosis, and that's why nobody recognized him. And I was like, what?
Oh, don't even. It's a whole thing. Like no one's powers have changed more over time than Superman.
Right.
But there's a corollary to that question about one true Batman. It's so funny because I'll be like, given the answer of like, well, he's elastic, he's so many things at so many different time periods. But if you ask me for Robin, I'm like, oh, it's Tim Drake, no doubt.
Yes! You're on the right podcast. We are hardcore Tim stans on this show.
Yeah, Chris has converted me. I love him now.
Yes. Oh, yes. I have a lot of notes about it. Tim Drake is mentioned maybe 5 sentences this whole book, and I have a page devoted to it.
Oh, gosh. One of my favorite parts of the book is it's pretty early on, but Weldon talks about how fanboys personally feel towards Batman Bruce as a character. Like they feel like he's just a normal guy. They could be Batman.
Yes.
And and whenever I ask someone why he's their favorite character, that's the reason you generally get, oh, he's just a normal guy. But he's he's a billionaire. They are nothing like Bruce Wayne. And not to get too political here, but I was making these notes during the recent election, and it's like we still have this with Donald Trump, these everyday straight cis white men who identify with this billionaire, and I just thought that was a really interesting connection.
It's such a good point, right? Because we've talked about several volumes now where it's Batman versus the establishment, and every time I'm like, okay, but sir, are you not the establishment?
Right. Yeah. It's so wild, because it's true, but and Glen Weldon is so funny in the way that he talks about that. He's like, well, anybody could be Batman. No, they couldn't. He's very clear. Is wait a minute. Batman is sort of like, the DC Universe's version of Captain America, right? Just without an origin based in science fiction. Okay, that's classic DC Marvel divide.
Yes.
But he's essentially at the top of human capacity and in physicality without being superhuman. Right. So you think about that, there's only a few individuals in history. I mean, we're talking about somebody like LeBron James from the NBA. You would have to have that kind of athleticism,
right.
to be just natural height, strength, weight, all that kind of stuff. That's not, no, you're not gonna do a few push-ups and be flipping off a rooftop. You know?
I know we read Tom King's first volume of Tom King's run which literally opens with Bruce Wayne shirtless, dripping sweat, like doing pull-ups off the side of a skyscraper. And I remember like opening that, and my first question was, "Wait, this one is aimed at straight men? I don't think it is." And
well, you know,
second...
Tom King's an old CIA guy, so you know it might be some wish fulfillment.
Yeah. Maybe once he could do it. I don't know.
Right.
But it definitely, but my thought was like, you know, of all those fans that are like, I could be Bruce Wayne, and I'm like, prove it, you know, go on American Ninja Warrior and then tell me you can be Bruce Wayne.
I mean, you know, but and also just like that mixed with, I mean, he's straight out of pulp, literary tradition, and being a character that's created in 1939. You know, the in popular culture, right, that idea of Sherlock Holmes would have been so present and so prevalent. So you're talking about, your like best Western, like kind of anti-hero dude mixed with a guy who's got a mind of like analytical prowess, like nah, I mean, like, look, it's not real. I mean, that's the whole thing, right? Like, but the thing about it is, when people say that, I think it's a classic example of that is not actually the reason that they like Batman. They don't recognize, or they can't articulate what's underneath that, which I think Glen Weldon does a really good job about. And that essentially saying what I think that whole idea is anybody could be Batman is for them is just another version of self-rescue, which is really why they like him, right? Like, why they like Batman is, here's a guy who is confronted with a societal evil that is unsurmountable. He knows, right, that he cannot really in the end stop crime, but he makes this childlike vow, and that vow is the thing he holds on to that helps him to rescue himself. Like, the 100%. Mission is really about going and getting that little boy who couldn't do anything in the face of random crime. And now that's not the best way, I think, nor the most healthy. I mean, Bruce needs a therapist for real. Like, for real. But it is. But I think that idea of self-rescue is one. Well, to be honest, too, that mixed with the idea of chosen family, is one that I think is eminently a queer kind of ethos, and one that I think many of the folks who are saying that don't realize that that's really what is the thing that is pleasurable to them.
Yeah, I think that the story that is, I believe, the very final story in the book is of Dean Tripp, who was the child that suffered like horrendous abuse. And the only reason that he didn't kill himself was reading the Bat comics and watching Batman overcome trauma and become something bigger. And, I think of that story all the time with your idea, this concept of self-rescue, that I think that is what he gives readers. I mean, that's obviously a very extreme example, but a real one of how this story can be so powerful to our mental health. That said, I will say, I think some people read it, and when they say they want to be him, what they mean is they wish they were him.
Yeah.
Which is a little different, and often has a little more rooted in the Frank Miller, hyper masculine, tough guy Batman than in the Batman as overcoming, self-rescuing Batman.
Chris, one day we're going to get you to read The Dark Knight Returns.
And I'm going to complain about it the whole time, TJ.
Well, I read it once, and I enjoyed it fairly.
I actually think you'll enjoy it more than you realize.
That's fair, because I haven't read it. The one that I read was Batman and Robin, All-Star Batman and Robin.
Oh, it's trash. It's trash. Don't
trash.
do it.
I know, where he literally kidnaps Dick Grayson. They talk about it in this book, where he kidnaps him and abuses him and starves him, and that's the one I read.
I tell you, there's nothing that will convince the kind of like after the fact analysis of some super fans who are like just really Frank Miller stands.
Yeah.
Essentially, we're trying to say, like, this is satire. This is like Frank Miller trying to lampoon his own work in The Dark Knight Returns, and I don't believe that to be the case.
No.
I think this was like an after the fact justification for how terrible that, and just how over the top it was. I mean, look, not everybody is batting 1,000 all the time, but the thing about the reason why I think The Dark Knight Returns is important for everybody to read, I think, is like, well, it's not that I want Batman to be a hyper masculine, like toxic, icon, but that exists in the world, like, and to act as if our heroes can't become that is naive. And so I think it has a lot more to say about our idealization of heroes. Our problematic, your problematic faves is the idea, right? And what it does in terms of like commentary on 1980s Reagan America, I think is really quite good.
Okay, Professor, I'll do my homework. I'll read it. TJ's been trying to get me to. I just I had it recovered from the one Frank Miller book I have read. So.
Maybe we'll bring Steven back. And
look, also, first female Robin is in this book, so like you can't look. I mean,
I do love that Glen Weldon points out the only reason it's the first female Robin is to make it less gay.
Oh yeah, well, yes. Yep.
Like, of course, we'd get, women represented just to avoid gay representation.
I mean, but I think she's pretty gay.
I know.
Yes. But that's what I was about to say. I'm like, come on now.
But I think that's just true. There's something wild about every time they've attempted to make Batman less gay, they have course corrected so hard that they make him way more gay every single time.
I think in the book too, don't they say like they purposefully didn't sexualize her and like she's very androgynous and like, to be fair, we give Frank Miller tons of shit on this podcast, but there was also a line in the book where Frank Miller is quoted saying like about how the Joker represents like sexuality and being feminine and being homosexual, and like I don't know if it was in that section or another quote, but the book also says like that's why Batman hates the Joker. Like if Batman is not if Batman is a repressive person, then he hates someone who is so expressive in that way.
Yes, I wrote this down as well. He says that Batman would be healthier if he was gay.
Yeah, I mean, there's no doubt. I think the presentation of the Joker has a kind of queer component to it. It's clear in the way that the art is stylized. It's clear in the kind of like homoerotic desire in the way that he talks. It's not subtle at all.
No,
we've read Grant Morrison.
Yeah, we've read Grant Morrison that takes all the subtext right out of that.
Right. The issue though I have with this, and I'd love to get you all's take on it too. Part of the problem the thing that makes me uncomfortable though is that you couch all of that in the pathology, right, of the Joker being a serial killer. So why is it that the representation of unfiltered homoerotic desire has to be a killer? It has to be someone that is institutionalized. It has to be somebody who is like seeking their own death in that text, right? Has a huge death wish. Like that seems like the opposite of being like really like clear-eyed about what we would want from a kind of a free and society for queer people.
I think that that's why I can't give Frank Miller any credit for that line, because he still ascribes those qualities to the villain, right? But there is such a long tradition of that, right? Half of Disney villains, probably more than half, like 75% of Disney villains are queer coded.
Yes.
Ursula, okay?
Yep, I'm looking at you, Ursula.
We're looking directly at you.
Divine, yeah.
So queer coding, and like I think now we are so conditioned, the queer community is so conditioned to just accept villains into the community because it's all we've been given. And you see that in the way that, you know, the Babadook is now a queer icon. I'm like, okay,
Right.
I guess.
Right.
You know, why not? We have Ursula. Let's Babadook get in here. Come on in.
Yeah, I think that one was like, tell me if I'm wrong. Wasn't it like a Netflix mess up where it was in the wrong section?
It originally was, but then there was like everyone went, you know, he does live in a closet, and there's now a billion think pieces about it.
Right. But yeah, the Joker being representation of queerness, and if that's a positive thing or not. But this is something we kind of touched on in our Arkham Asylum episode of the Grant Morrison story, and there was a lot of like pedophilia involved with the Joker, and it was like, oh, here's this very queer person, and oh, also we're gonna make him make all these like weird remarks about children, and you know, so it's like I think it's part of the time period of when he was created, but also like it's 2020.
Yeah.
I mean, I think what is always, you know, and this is me, you know, this is a definite hot take. Ooh. You know, I think it's not Batman that's repressed, it's Grant Morrison and Frank Miller that are repressed.
Yeah, I mean,
and that's why you get all of that.
We know that to be true somewhat of Grant Morrison now that they have come out as non-binary. Like they were, you know, going through some stuff, and I think that knowing that, because we did our episode about like a few weeks before that article came out, and we were like, oh, come on, you couldn't have this article a few weeks ago, because going back to it, I'm like, oh, like there's some stuff being worked out here. You know?
For sure.
Definitely. Yeah, our episode uploaded, and then like 2 days later,
we were so mad. We were like, oh, the timing.
I was like, do we think Grant Morrison listens? I was like,
could you imagine?
Like, that was a big coincidence, though.
It was a great coincidence. Oh man.
Yeah, I mean, there's just such a you know, I'll be interested when we get eventually, right, a woman writing the main title for Batman or Detective Comics consistently, and what that person brings. You know, I mean, because I'm really a big fan of Gail Simone.
Yes.
On Batgirl and on Wonder Woman and many other things. And you know, it's really it's just such a I'd like to see what Batman might become. Yeah. Right. In the hands of someone who perhaps accepts the cyclical nature to him. In fact, I think, you know, that I don't know if you all are reading the current James Tynion run.
Yes, we've covered the first volume, The Rise of the Batman of the.
So that's that's Detective Comics.
Yeah, the Detective Comics. We haven't started
Batman one. Right, I have that on my bedside to read actually.
Yeah, he just took over for Tom King not too long ago. And he gets it pretty right. You know, there's a moment where spoilers, but there's a moment where he's transporting this character Deathstroke, you know, classic Teen Titans villain, through the city. You know, he's kind of like Batman's prisoner, and like the city's all going to hell. And you know, they're in a subway, and you know, this like giant engine, you know, pulls up, and Deathstroke's like, "You have a bat train?" and Batman's like, "Of course I do." Like, just like no, like in panel, no, you know, like that idea of him getting the joke, right? Of Batman being meta, I think allows for, you know, some different ways of letting go of that kind of, you know, just repressed, like repressed individual that just generates all of this sort of toxicity. You know, so what does Batman look like if he's free? You know, not free from trauma, but free from a particular kind of repression that may exist in some of the male authors that have written him.
Yeah, I think that's why I particularly connect to the way that Peter Tomasi writes him in Super Sons, which is focusing exclusively on him as father to Damian, and it's one of the least toxic versions of Batman I've ever read, and it's very sweet. I don't know if you've read that one, but
I have. Yeah, it's great.
I love that take. Yeah, I'm with you on this.
And I have to point out, Tynion is another queer writer.
Yep.
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 Yeah.
For sure.
Before we totally leave Joker and his whole deal, I will say that reading this book now again, I had a realization, TJ, that you'll appreciate and probably be shocked by me saying based on the other things I've said about Joker.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think I actually hate the Joker character.
What?
I know. I've kind of famously on this show been anti-Joker. I've made the comment that I think he works better as seasoning, not as a main character, which I still think is pretty true most of the time. But I realized that my problem is not with Joker as a character. It's that I'm so tired of people for whom Joker is their favorite character. This is definitely an instance of fandom ruining character for me.
Right. And of course, we loved the Joker in the Batman Telltale video games.
Yeah.
That was a great portrayal. If you haven't played those, Steven, you've got it. They're amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I hear nothing but good things about them.
Yeah.
And I'm always like, well, is it kind of like a visual novel kind of idea? Like, is it, you're kind of you're not really making choices, but you're kind of making choices.
No, it's more like it's an emotional choose your own adventure.
There you go.
I really liked it. So we got, you get to pick your version of Batman that you play. And TJ and I didn't talk to each other about it and still accidentally almost play the exact same way, which is
right. So you can make him an asshole or really kind. Like,
and of course, TJ and I made him into a disaster bisexual.
Yep. And the Joker in that version is a simp for Bruce Wayne and confirmed by.
Yeah, I was gonna say canonically queer in that game. So
yeah, it's great.
Yeah, it's a it's just the Joker is a character for whom I enjoy his mystery more than his definition.
Same.
Like when he exists as mutable, and maybe that's because of me growing in my understanding of valuing that in Batman as well.
Yeah.
I just find that much more fascinating. It's like, I don't want to know this guy's real name. I don't want to know his origin story. What I want to do is see the unexpected, right? And I want something, because he represents that for which Batman is purposed, right? Like to solve a mystery, like to solve something that needs solving, and the Joker is a question without an answer.
Yeah.
And that dynamic I find, albeit Sisyphean, pretty fascinating to watch.
And I think that's why I connect to stories where he's just appears occasionally or has an effect on the story more than the ones where it's like we're just gonna really get in there with Joker. Because I think it's like showing the shark in Jaws, right? He's infinitely less interesting the more we see him.
I would love to hear what Glen Weldon thinks about the Joker movie.
Oh, he's reviewed it on the podcast, so you can.
Oh, good.
I know. I got to the end. I couldn't remember where this book ended timeline wise, and I got to the end, and I was like, "Aw." I don't get his commentary, because one of the very last lines in the book is him going, "Soon we'll have another restart," and I was like, "You didn't know how soon."
Right.
Like, immediately.
Right.
How do you feel, out of curiosity, how do you feel about Rebirth, this current new one?
Well, it's funny, right? Like, so Glen Weldon's book, the first edition, he added a little bit more to cover some of New 52, like more of New 52 there.
Yeah.
And I think it's, and he includes some in the afterword of subsequent editions, but I wanted to like it so much, and I had been a fan of Tom King from his miniseries on The Vision for Marvel.
Yeah.
Yes, I loved that.
Really good, really. I mean, excellent. And I tend to think of Tom King as being really good at the sort of 12-issue miniseries more than a 100-issue arc, which is what he supposedly wanted to do. But
Mr. Miracle, also a masterpiece.
yeah, absolutely. I mean,
Yeah.
Dark Side is right. Yeah.
Yes. Yes. Way to haunt
but-
my dreams.
right, for real. Well, we'll all be scot-free. My issue with Rebirth and with Tom King's overarching, sort of narrative business is I mean, I love the relationship with Selena Kyle. I love that playing out. He's just asking the wrong questions.
Yeah.
No, I mean, his central thesis is all about, can Batman be happy?
Yeah.
I'm like, this is so old fashioned. It is mid 20th century, like nostalgia. It's a question that has already been answered in the mythology.
Yeah.
Quite well. It is passe. And so that's why, I feel like the overall on his run, it has some good ideas that don't pay off very well. And so I can't help but feeling sort of cheated in some ways. So I'm not a big fan of it overall, although I don't know, I just wanted so badly for them to ask more important, deeper questions rather than, can Batman be happy?
Yeah,
that's exactly how I
Nobody
felt.
cares.
We read the first volume of Tom King's Batman run, and like there was so much potential, and I felt like it just wasn't grasped.
Yeah. I think I had a lot of fun with it. I think that he got the voices down really well. Like Alfred is quippier than ever in Tom King's one. Love it. But I definitely I enjoyed it. I had a blast with it, but I also don't think it went very deep, which surprised me because I had just come off reading Mr. Miracle and I thought of Tom King as like this writer that goes deep. But I think it makes sense to me that the idea of the confines of a shorter version is probably helpful for him.
I did enjoy this second volume a lot more, even though I said I would never read it.
I love that you caved and read it. That makes me happy.
It was better, but
is the second I mean, so you'll have to forgive me. I almost exclusively read single issues. But yes, is the second volume War of Jokes and Riddles? Which is what's the sort of arc there?
It's the I Am Suicide arc where he breaks. Right. He has like a little team of villains and they go after Bane. That was interesting.
Yeah. I it's there's just so much there where I'm like, I like Bane quite a bit as a kind of like interesting foil for Batman. But I don't know. Like there's just so much there's a quality to it that always feels like Swiss cheese to me. Like great on a sandwich and still full of holes. Like,
that's really fair.
But who am I to talk, right? Like this is just kind of one in the many cycles of Batman. I mean, there's certainly issues. Well, kind of classically, right? Like sometimes there can be interesting things happening and problematic things happening all in the same sort of arc and issue.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking specifically, and this comes up a little bit in the Caped Crusade as well. I'm thinking a little bit about A Death in the Family. Yeah. Right. So like you get this like iconic moment in pop culture history where the fans like kill a character off, and the vote is like so 2020, so super close, like it's like ridiculous, but in that same issue, like the Joker is an ambassador for Iran, like
what on earth? I know it's so
bizarre.
It's such a weird, that is a very weird time in Batman history where it was like, let's get more international. And I'm going back and reading it. I'm like, could you maybe not? Actually, you're doing this badly.
God, I can't wait to read that.
I know. Oh, and I don't know if you've, Stephen, if you've read the anniversary edition of Death in the Family they put out, where they give the panels that they drew of the other ending where it ends happy. It like tore my heart out.
Oh yeah, man, they had them ready to go. Like
They were like, here, look what you could have had.
yeah, right, right. And so I mean, Denny O'Neil's kind of but it's also sort of a genius move
Yeah.
in some ways because, I mean, I think they recognized one, they had an unpopular character in Jason Todd that was so similar to, particularly in his pre-crisis
Yeah.
mode to Dick Grayson.
Right.
But they never, he wasn't going to be, Robin wasn't going to be dead for very long. Like there was,
Right.
like he's going to always sort of come back. But there's an interesting thing about if you get the initial trade paperback editions of Death in the Family,
Yeah.
they have a bit of marginalia that don't exist anywhere else. And it's this fictional academic article written by a professor Socrates at Gotham University, and it is fascinating because it talks about like why he thinks they're so, like, the police name everything bat plane, batarang, bat, all the like all of this like sort of linguistic stuff. But it's such an interesting like forward to the story. But it's a complete like like persona like thing. It's like a deep fake. And it is unattributed.
That's
So
amazing.
in the trade paperback, you don't actually know who wrote it. Now, as part of the class, we tried to figure it out. Like I was calling, I called a guy I met named Mark Nobleman. I don't know if you know him, but he's got a fantastic documentary on Hulu called Batman and Bill, and it's all about Bill Finger and his uncredited for the fight to get him credit as a co-creator of Batman.
Right.
I highly recommend it. But we tried to see like if anybody knew from DC or whatever. And it's most likely that it's Denny O'Neil who wrote this. But and Denny O'Neil, rest in peace, just passed recently. But the way you sort of get there is like the name of the professor is like a character in the question that Denny O'Neil also wrote. Like so this like fictional article is doing some like interesting things, but is written by somebody with a nod to sort of other kinds of fandoms. But that stuff like sort of fascinates me in that, you only get this thing in one trade paperback. And then when they start doing the like combination of Death in the Family and where they introduced Tim Drake, like the name of it is slipping from me, where they combine that into one, all that stuff sort of like leaves. So it's a wild little bit of like bat deep dives.
I love that you did some detective work on this. That's fascinating.
Yeah, in true fashion for the Dark Knight, right?
While we're talking about detective work, I'm curious if you can weigh in on a debate we've been having on our Twitter account, which is, who is the actual greatest detective in the DC universe?
I mean, who are the? I mean, who are the other like players? Like,
well, I made the assertion that I think Tim Drake is a better detective than Batman is.
I see. Yeah.
and then other people were like, no, actually Dick is better, and I'm like, is he? Okay. But apparently we all agree that Batman isn't better than the two of them.
It's maybe necessity is the mother of an invention, because they write a little, they write about this or in the voice of Tim Drake, they say this often about, I'm not a natural athlete like Jason Todd was and Dick Grayson are. I have to work at it, but what I am is very analytical. I'm a very good detective, and that's always sort of been like the thing that endeared me to him.
Me
so
too.
I would tend to I would definitely be rooting for Drake as the better one, but it may just come down to I mean, this is going to be really sort of like academic and wonky, but
okay, I'm ready.
Sorry. So there's this famous literary critic named Harold Bloom.
Yes.
So some of you're probably familiar with him.
Yes.
He writes this this like famous text talking about the anxiety of influence. And he is essentially saying that that there is this pressure from contemporary in literature, right? When an author is sitting down to write, there's this pressure to sort of compete in this very almost, in this almost Oedipal way with authors that have come before them.
Yeah.
And that pressure ends up being a kind of misreading of those other authors in the work that the contemporary author attempts to make. So an example would be like, okay, like Faulkner is misreading Shakespeare, and that's how we get As I Lay Dying, right? He's in this like existential struggle with those things. But then Harold Bloom goes on to say that there are certain figures who sort of erase their contemporaries. They are so influential, they're so profound, right? Foucault calls them like founders of discursivity, right? They're just so like the shit, they can't, that you can't sort of like have any conversation without them. So my issue with saying Tim Drake, it's bring it full circle, is it's hard to say that the person who trained him, the person in whom he is modeled, is that he has like surpassed them. Because if that were true, right, it would, then his place in the Bat family would be, I think, a different one, right? So it's hard for me to like. I mean, I'm not a forensic scientist or anything like that, so I can't judge it on the fictional, like, how they did this. But I mean, just thinking of it as a kind of narrative device, I think it's hard to not place Batman at that top, not because of primacy, but because if they were actually going head to head, I think that pressure, that sort of like, for lack of a better word, Oedipal pressure, would not produce Tim able to show his full powers.
Wow. Okay, so I was just, knowing you were a Tim Drake fan, I was just trying to stack the deck, but that was a really good answer.
That was pretty impressive.
Well, it's a pretty professorial answer.
That was good. Okay, fine. So I didn't stack the deck in my favor on this argument, but that was actually brilliant, and I learned some things. So
yeah. So talking about one Robin to another, a very different topic. Can we please talk about the Batman and Robin homoeroticism?
Oh my gosh.
Because I was super intrigued about that. Like, I haven't read a lot of the old stuff or any of it, to be fair, but all the modern stuff, like Dick is very much Bruce's adopted son. And there is, in my opinion, there's no room for the gay subtext between them in the modern canon. So like, what's your guys' take on the older canon and that topic?
I think it's so hard to look back, because I think, TJ, for you and I, we're like so firmly lodged in the era where he's so clearly his son, that I'm just trying to imagine what it would have been like to originally start reading it. And I don't know. I think that's really tough, because I think you're right. They've done a pretty solid job taking away that subtext, which, like, thankfully, I love gay subtext, but not between father and son, please. Thanks. Let's not do that. So I'm fine with that not being there. But, I don't know, because, we're fortunate, right? We actually have Bat family members that are canon queer. We don't have to search quite as hard. No, we still do. That's what this whole show is based on, right? But we don't have to search quite as hard to find it. And in a time when there was none, I could see grabbing what there was.
It's a really, I mean, there are many facets to it, right? Because I think, Glen Weldon points out this sort of like sort of Freudian slip of an ally, and the kerning between the words being not enough in the sort of introduction of Robin. But I mean, there is undeniably, I think, I think some of it comes from the way in which Bruce Wayne's the persona of Bruce Wayne as a kind of like rich playboy figure has evolved over time. And so, I mean, for lack of a better word, he is sometimes presented much more foppish.
Yeah.
And in other presentation, like once we get like a grim and gritty, Dark Knight Returns on 1980s on, that idea is always meant to be some kind of like play acting, right? Some kind of
Right.
like buffoonish kind of, like putting on the Ritz sort of stuff.
Right.
But I don't think that is not always what it was. I think part of it was how I think the rich were seen,
Mhm.
and in other words, almost having like the luxury to explore,
Yeah.
different ideas of gender and expressions of feminist. Because you have power, what are people gonna say?
Yeah.
They're not gonna take your job. You're not gonna get fired. You're not gonna get
Right.
dragged into the streets and beaten. I mean, you might be like Oscar Wilde and have to go to court. Like it's a difficult thing. So I think, so some of that stuff exists, I think, like in the unit of Bruce Wayne, right,
Yeah.
as a kind of playboy, quote unquote playboy figure,
Right.
kind of confirmed bachelor. These are all the coded terms, right? Like,
Right.
these
No,
are all,
100%. I think
like,
when Glen Weldon makes that list of like what people were connecting to, the threat of your secret self exposed, the
yep.
everything being under the cloak of night, the close male relationships and not close female relationships ever,
Mhm.
and the whole like attention to aesthetic. I mean, Glen Weldon very jokingly talks about the drapes and whatever, but even the performance, the aesthetic performance of Batman could be a little bit drag like in many
Yep.
ways.
Oh yeah.
Right.
We
I
stand
found
a
it
good cape,
interesting.
right?
Yeah, we do. I mean, we love a cape.
I found the part interesting that talked about, like, we mentioned the gay awakening already, but like how it was the gay awakening. So for so many queer young men, of like,
Yeah.
you can't blame them for reading about
Yeah.
a slim boy and his big muscular partner running around in spandex. Like, I get it. And then we also have like so many young gay men or older gay men nowadays who were young in the 90s relate their gay awakening to the Robin from Batman and Robin and Batman Forever. Like, that's such a big
Right.
thing people talk about in nerd gay culture nowadays. So I just thought that was worth pointing out too.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I mean, I think the biggest thing to understand is that it's always been there. It's
Yeah.
not something that has been sort of, it's not a kind of overreading. It's not a kind of projection into the text. It's been a part and parcel of how he's been presented
Yeah.
from, both from Robin's introduction, pixie boots, notwithstanding,
Choices
but
were made.
and I get it. I mean, at the time they would have said potentially like this is meant to be like, Robin Hood, but you're
Yeah.
not doing yourself any favors because Robin Hood is already,
Queer icon Robin Hood that ran around with his merry men.
Absolutely. So, I mean, I think, but you do. I mean, the thing that I was going to come around to saying is like you have instances of them sleeping in the same bed,
Yeah.
even though ostensibly they're supposed to be, adopted. Like they
Right.
always use that funny word. He's a ward. He's like a caretaker.
Right.
But it is. You don't have to dig very deep
No.
to see to like have that reading. And I think
Yeah.
Glen Weldon is just right. I mean, it's sort of right there, in the way that the character is constructed, and
Yeah.
and again, I think in part of it's part of the elasticity, right?
Yeah.
It's that idea that it's not, you don't have to be any one thing, at any one time. I think
Yeah.
is sort of really important, but
Yeah.
yeah.
And I think while they've definitely stepped away from any rating of that between him and Dick Grayson, the way that him and Superman are written now is it's hard to miss. The
Yeah.
way they call each other, they're like, he's mine. There's a whole lot of queerness in that.
Mm.
So, they've found a new, maybe healthier ship now.
Yeah, I mean, and I mean, look, and there's just, there's just I see it in the sort of tradition of,
Yeah.
the Iliad and the Odyssey, right? Like
Yeah.
in terms of, this has always been a part of Western literature.
Yes.
This kind of subtext, and so I see it as kind of just part of why would it not show up in pop culture
Right.
when it was already a part of sort of literary pop culture. What changes is what is the terms used, right, and how overt some of the presentations can be. Because the other thing that I gotta say that you have to contend with is the sliding and sort of unclear age difference between Bruce Wayne and
Right.
and Dick Grayson. Oh, Dick is like 12. He's like he is absolutely an adolescent when he's introduced, but that difference in age shrinks and grows, and then they
Yes.
they much the sometimes it seems like much more older brother younger brother idea, and then other times it is like so much clearly like my adult son,
Right. So sometimes it's a little call me by your Robin. I had been holding on to that one for a while.
I'll trust you on it.
I've been reading some Tom Taylor recently. I love him. And he writes Batman and Robin, or Bruce and Dick, very much as like, you are my son. And Chris, I'm thinking about Injustice specifically.
Yes.
And that was so good. I love their relationship there.
I love them as family. That's how I think of them as well. But yeah, I mean, they didn't. I think queer fans are always going to create representation where it isn't. And now there are more characters, so it doesn't have to be Bruce and Dick. It can be,
a slew of hot women.
A slew of it could, all of the bisexuals
and Tim Drake, the one we just don't talk about.
Yeah.
Oh goodness.
Can we take a minute to talk about the Adam West Batman show?
Sure.
Because I feel like that is like instrumental to this book.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I loved it.
Yeah, I mean, I think Glen Weldon made me love it more, you know, in a way that, again, I would have said I wouldn't have appreciated it beyond a kind of like, I would have dismissed it for being a farce without recognizing letting it, what it was doing, and that sometimes farces can be really important. So yeah, I mean, I enjoyed it as well.
Yeah, I really like the way he breaks it down and describes the intentionality that was put into it. Because I think if I had thought of it before, it was with a fondness, but I thought it was silly, And hearing how much real thought was put into exactly the tone, the exact way it was done, I think it did make me appreciate it more.
Yeah, I agree. My exposure to this series, which reading the book like had me going down a mind spiral. I could remember Batman getting bitten by the shark, which was mentioned in the book. And I was like, where have I seen this? And I realized I had a copy of that movie as a kid. And I think it was the only not episode, I'm going to count it as an episode of the show that I've ever seen until finishing the book, because I went and watched the pilot that was mentioned, and I've been watching the animated movies that have Adam West from a couple years back, and they're just so much fun.
Yeah. The shark repellent, is that what you're referring to?
Yeah, shark repellent.
Yeah.
I mean, and I mean, yeah, the Bat-Tusi, right, from the first episode, they're really like setting the borders, pretty broad. And I mean, the show is so interesting in many ways too, because Batman is essentially a police officer. Like he's an agent of he works as a deputized something of the cops. I forget how they said exactly. And so that I think is fascinating to me, because of there's a way of reading it and saying if essentially there is this kind of absurdity, right, to it that is being shown and played with, and certainly the kind of like uh, kind of pop art stuff that's influencing it. It calls into question sort of the absurdity of the police as well.
Yeah.
And that in a way that we would not talk about them as heroes, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Absolutely.
but as maybe symbols of ridicule.
Yeah.
There's a lot of like ways in which I go back to it, other than like, gosh, who cannot like seeing Eartha Kitt as
yes.
as Catwoman? I mean,
yes.
gracious,
Yeah, we've talked about her so much on this
We
podcast.
have.
I didn't realize that Barbara Gordon Batgirl was created basically for the 60s show.
Was created for the show, was revealed before it, but was created for it. I think that's
right.
so interesting. TJ and I were talking about this. Why are all of the incredibly good women characters made for the shows and then added to the comics? I mean, Harley Quinn, Barbara Gordon, like I'm forgetting somebody else too. But
Renee Montoya was from the
Renee.
animated
that's
series.
right. That's right.
Yeah.
I just found that out the other day.
Yeah, what's up? There's something there. I don't know what it is, but there's definitely something to be said for that.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, it's like it cannot be any cheaper, to take a risk in a comic book than it can on a like national TV show or on a incredibly expensive animated show. Like,
I wonder if it's part of that stereotype that Glen Weldon gets into, which is that comics continues somehow to believe that women are not reading them.
Yeah.
Somehow.
Yeah.
Even still, like they've gotten better. But I mean, when I first started reading comics, which was 10 years ago, not long. I went into a comic book shop and got told to go look at the girls' shelf.
It's always, just really interesting to me how people find their way to Batman 2.
Yeah.
And I think for so many people, the show, and I think the show is so important, the 66 show, because it really democratizes like who Batman is for. But then, Glen Weldon talks about this in the book, that it also breeds this resentment, right?
Yes.
And this really interesting, I mean, this is the other part of the book that I think I find so fascinating is the sort of cultural critique about nerd culture and its rise. I mean, being even obviously in the subtitle as well.
Right.
But that idea of, and he was just talking about this today because they were doing an episode on Scott Pilgrim on Pop Culture Happy Hour. And he was saying like the thing that nerds want most is for their beloved thing, right? But beloved character, beloved comic series, whatever, to become mainstream, so more of it is made, or made on bigger scales, to be movies and stuff like that, to become popular. But then they simultaneously often feel like this very almost like hipster, but you weren't liking it when it wasn't cool, you didn't experience the hard fight to love these things when nobody would,
Right.
And it's a interesting sort of tension, because I can admit to feeling that way sometimes, but ultimately I think the people who found their way to Batman through the Adam West show and loved it, right, I think didn't walk away and say, well, Batman is just, some bit of silliness, right? Although they enjoyed the comedy of it. And even the people who didn't like it, counterexamples can be great, right? They found and maybe clarified some of the things about that they would like in Batman. So I'm just like, give me any kind of presentation of this character that is sort of artfully done, so that's how I approach it. But I'm trying to recall, there's a term that they use talking, I mean, this is from Susan Sontag. It's not glam. There's a
camp.
Camp, that's what it is.
Yes.
I was like, yes.
Yes.
You cannot deny, right? Like, this is a kind of masterwork in camp.
Yes.
And so I think it's important. I mean, it has such an importance for that reason as well.
No, I agree. It made, this book made me go back and start watching it too, TJ. Just the aesthetic is so good. It's both hard and not surprising somehow counterintuitively. that people got mad at this. Like watching it and being like, why would you get mad? But then I also have talked to people, so I can understand.
Right.
But
It was too gay.
it
as Glen
was
Weldon
too
says.
gay.
And we love gay here.
We do. And it's just also, I loved the point that Glen Weldon makes that every new Batman people are going to be mad at. So we talked about this. Our very first episode was covering the trailer of, Robert Pattinson's Batman. And people, it's the trailer had not been released before people were mad at that existence of that. Right.
Oh yeah. No, you cannot plead. I mean, there is no, I mean, that's the thing, right?
Yeah.
Like, you're trying, it's like, it's like trying to tell somebody, well, what version of God do you want? Like, it's not gonna work. I mean, you're gonna make somebody upset.
You are right.
You think you're talking about comics, and they treat it like you're talking about theology. Like, I'm like, look, it's
100%.
It's not. I mean, it's not that it isn't like serious and not important to sort of like take those things seriously, enjoy the deep dive of them all. But I just can't get over in some ways how much that I do not care for any hills to die on. When it comes to that, because there's just something. There literally is something for everyone, and even for yourself. I think, why would you insist that Batman be a static thing when you yourself don't exist in that way, and nor would you insist on being a static thing, right? Like, I write about this a lot, not only in my column Nerd Volta or just in my own sort of research. We have such an obsession with authenticity, and with policing authenticity. So raise your hand if you're a Black person in America who's ever been told you're not Black enough, who's also a nerd, right? But it exists across cultures, right? Not being gay enough, not being, like not performing, like the erasure of bi identity, there's just so much about these concerns. I mean, don't even get started on turfs, like it's just too, there's so much about who gets to lay claim to what, a kind of policing the borders of identity. And I think Batman is this odd, like, representation of that, right? Like, and so it's just interesting to me that we want there's such a kind of like, what do you call it, like, people take it personally.
There's an ownership.
For sure. Like you've offended them, talking about this fictional character. It's funny.
Yes,
right.
Honestly.
How dare you cast Michael Keaton as Batman?
I mean,
and now he's nerd. He's famous for nerds.
His jaw is not square enough.
Yeah, he's not very tall.
All
right. But it is. I felt the same way about oh gosh, why can't I think of his name right now? Boston guy who in Batman vs Superman in Justice League.
Ben
Affleck.
Batfleck.
Yeah. I felt when I heard the news of that, I was like, no way, no way, and I was pleasantly surprised.
Yeah, we're a Batfleck defender. We believe he would have been good if he had a good movie.
For sure. Like,
it's not his fault. He was not the weak link.
No.
I'm hoping the Snyder Cut and the Flash movie will redeem him.
Oh,
for sure.
The Snyder
Cut. We shall see.
I was not encouraged by that porcupine of a Steppenwolf upgrade. Have you seen the memes? Have you seen the memes of this thing? Like, oh my gosh. I'm like,
what was that?
1,000 extra knives? Like, what? We're not having steak here. Like, we're just trying to get a box. Like, I mean, God Almighty.
It's so real.
But yeah, I just the thing that I think Glen Weldon's book taught me to be towards Batman is more open,
I love that.
And that openness, I think, is a useful and just valuable lesson, because it made me realize just where I have certain biases, where like I said, where you don't need to like die on this hill. And ultimately you can be more accepting. Like you can be, everyone gets to be in the Bat family because the Bat family is so elastic, and that that sort of, I mean, it's a kind of liberal ideal,
Mhm.
but I think it's just so important, right? Because I think
Right.
it's also like the big broad message of comics in general, right? Like everybody
Yeah.
gets to play. We can make whole new worlds and still talk about relevant things like responsibility. Like what is? I mean, I think there's a whole. I'm a child of divorce, which is nothing new,
Mhm.
but you know, I think many of us growing up seeing these characters deal with the loss of parents or parents who weren't there, and,
Right.
and having to like cobble together parental figures from whatever was available. um that was an important sort of formational thing to experience. And so I
Yeah.
think it's one of the reasons why I keep returning to Batman so often is
Yeah.
I find myself more and more opened up, less and less like that calcified, the goddamn Batman, and more and more like this Adam West, figure that, living in a world where it seems like anything could be possible, even Batman, in a disco hall, you know, kind of getting down.
Absolutely.
And what would you guys rate this book? 1 out of 5 batarangs.
Well, this gets all 5 batarangs. I'm giving it more batarangs. I'm building batarangs to give it extra ones.
For sure, right? I mean, 5 batarangs with a remote control batarang asterisk on the end.
5 batarangs, a Batmobile, a bat train,
Yeah, and a grapple to boot, right?
and a grapple to boot. This is amazing. I love this book with my whole heart.
Yeah.
I laughed like crazy. I cried a few times. I'm not gonna lie. It brought me to
Aw.
tears. Oh yeah, I know. I'm soft and squishy.
Yeah, it's a fiver for me too. I really enjoyed it.
Well, thank you for coming on, Stephen, and talking to us about this amazing book in your class. And I feel like I've learned so much today.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure. I can't get over being with other bat geeks, and
Yay.
just having a ball, talking about what we love. I feel renewed.
Yes.
Well, we will have to do it again very
Maybe
soon.
very, very soon, maybe.
Yeah,
Maybe.
same bat time, same bat channel.
That's how we end every episode.
You almost got it. So, Stephen, where can our listeners find you on social media? And do you have any projects they should be looking out for?
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter, at SD as in dog, Leyva, Leyva. And just be warned, you're going to see a lot of manga and anime adjacent content, along with maybe some craft talks about poetry. And you can find some of the writing that I do at the Washington Independent Review of Books. I have a column there called Nerd Volta, which explicitly talks about the intersection of anime, manga, comics, dance, theater, and what those different artistic disciplines can teach creative writers about the writing process. So, you can come over to Nerd Volta and get some recommendations and some interesting things to read and think about. And if you're into poems, I have a book that came out in October called The Understudy's Handbook, which is my debut collection of poetry that won the Gene Feldman Poetry Prize from Washington Writers Publishing House. So those are a few places to find me out in the ether.
Thank you so much for joining us. It's time for Outsider of the Week. Our outsider this week is Tuxedo Dinosaur on Twitter. You have been there for so long for the show. You go hard for us all the time on Twitter. We see you and we appreciate how much you're interacting and bringing to our podcast discussions. I don't think a post goes by that doesn't have your amazing feedback. We see you and we adore you.
Yay, you really deserve it. And there's more than just you doing this, but you do it so consistently and have one of the ones doing it the longest, like Chris has said. And you just really deserve to be acknowledged for how much you contribute to us and on our social media. So thank you so much.
Absolutely. It's always nice to know, this is not just TJ and I talking to each other in a void. There's someone out there listening, and you make us feel heard, really. And we are very happy to shout you out. So everybody go follow at Tuxedo Dinosaur on Twitter. And if you want to be Outsider of the Week, come join us on Twitter. We hope to see you there.
Yeah, and if you haven't heard from our Twitter, Stephen will be joining us next time to discuss the Court of Owls saga, and we cannot wait to do that as well.
It's going to be good, y'all.
Yes, see you then. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Gotham Outsiders. You can find me, Chris, individually on Twitter at The Myth of Psyche, where I talk about queerness and feminism and pretty often Batman. You can also find me now on the new podcast Progressively Horrified with comics writers Jeremy Whitley and Ben Kahn. And TJ, where can they find you?
They can find me at TroyFinn2 on Twitter, where I talk about all things book related and occasionally Batman related.
And you can find us both over on the Gotham Outsiders Twitter, at Gotham Outsiders on Twitter, where we talk about Batman all the time. Thanks for listening, and tune in next time. Same bat time, same bat place.